I used to sleep well. That's what I miss most. The ability to close my eyes at night and drift off without seeing that dark shape rising from the water, without hearing the sound it made, without feeling the way my entire body went cold when I realized what I was looking at through the viewfinder. My name is James Kerr. I'm 58 years old. I live alone in a cottage outside Fort William, about 30 miles from Loch Ness. I've lived here since 1982, 8 years now. Before that night in July of 1986, I was content. Happy, even. I had my photography work, my quiet life, my peace. Now I have none of those things. I was a wildlife photographer. That's what I did for a living. Freelance work mostly, selling images to nature magazines, conservation organizations, the occasional book publisher. I specialized in Scottish wildlife. Red deer, golden eagles, otters, seals. I spent weeks at a time in the highlands, camping in remote locations, waiting for the perfect shot. I was good at it. Patient. Observant. I understood animal behavior, knew how to position myself, how to wait, how to become invisible. I'd been doing it for 20 years by 1986. It was more than a job. It was who I was. Loch Ness wasn't supposed to be part of my work. I'd driven past it hundreds of times, never gave it much thought beyond its obvious beauty. The monster stories were for tourists, I figured. A bit of Scottish folklore turned into a money-making scheme. I'd never seen anything unusual there, never heard anything from the local photographers I knew that made me think twice. But in July of 1986, I got a commission from a natural history magazine. They wanted images of Loch Ness at different times of day, different weather conditions, different seasons. Nothing to do with monsters. Just landscape photography. Atmospheric shots of the water, the surrounding hills, the play of light across the surface. It paid well. I accepted the job. Planned to spend 2 weeks there, camping along the shore, capturing the loch in all its moods. I thought it would be easy work. Peaceful. A nice break from tracking animals through the heather. I had no idea what I was about to film. No idea that one night, one moment, one decision to keep the camera running would destroy everything I'd built. My career. My reputation. My peace of mind. If you're watching this, I need you to do something before I continue. Subscribe to this channel. Share this video. Leave a comment. Not because I want fame or attention. I don't. But because what I'm about to tell you, what I'm about to show you, needs to be heard by as many people as possible. Because for 34 years, I've been called a liar. A fraud. A man who fabricated footage for money or attention. And I'm tired of it. I'm tired of carrying this alone. So please, help me make sure this testimony reaches people. Because the footage is real. What I filmed that night in July 1986 actually happened. And I've paid for it every single day since. I arrived at Loch Ness on July 8, 1986. The weather was typical for the Highlands in summer. Overcast, occasional drizzle, temperatures in the low 60s. Not ideal for photography, but I'd worked in worse conditions. I set up camp on the western shore, near a place called Invermariston. There's a small clearing there, sheltered by trees, with a good view of the water. I'd been recommended the spot by another photographer who'd worked in the area. Quiet, he'd said. You'll have it to yourself. He was right. In that first week, I saw maybe a dozen people. A few hikers passing through. A family having a picnic one afternoon. Mostly, I was alone with the water and the hills and the slowly changing light. I worked methodically. Morning shots at dawn, when the mist hung low over the surface. Midday shots when the sun occasionally broke through. Evening shots as the light turned golden and then faded to purple. I used different lenses, different exposures, different angles. Built up a collection of images that captured the loch's character. It was peaceful work. Exactly what I needed. I'd been through a difficult divorce the year before, had spent months feeling unmoored and exhausted. Being out here, alone with my camera, felt like returning to myself. The nights were quiet. I'd cook a simple meal on my camp stove, sit by the water as darkness fell, then retreat to my tent to sleep. The only sounds were the occasional call of a bird, the lap of water against the shore, the wind moving through the trees. I never thought about monsters. Never scanned the water looking for disturbances or unusual shapes. That wasn't why I was there. I was documenting a landscape, nothing more. But on the 6th night, something changed. I was sitting by the water after dinner, watching the last light fade from the sky. It was around 10:30, still not fully dark because of how far north we are. The water was calm, almost glassy. And then I heard something. A sound. Low. Resonant. Coming from somewhere out on the water. I stood up, looked out across the loch. Couldn't see anything. The sound came again. Louder this time. It wasn't a bird. Wasn't a boat engine. It was something else. Something I couldn't identify. I grabbed my camera. Not because I thought I was about to photograph a monster, but because I'm a photographer. When something unusual happens, my instinct is to document it. I set up the tripod, attached the camera, pointed it toward the water. The sound came again. And then I saw it. A disturbance on the surface. Maybe 100 yards out. Not a wave. Not a splash. Just the water moving in a way that didn't match the wind or current. I started shooting. Long exposure shots, trying to capture any movement. The disturbance continued for maybe 2 minutes. And then it stopped. The water went still again. The sound faded. I reviewed the images on the camera. They showed the disturbance, but nothing clear. Just dark water and a vague sense of motion. Nothing conclusive. Nothing that would make anyone look twice. I packed up the camera and went to bed. Told myself it was probably just a large fish. A salmon, maybe, or a pike. Nothing mysterious. Nothing worth worrying about. But I didn't sleep well that night. I kept hearing that sound. Kept seeing the way the water had moved. And some part of me, some deep instinct, knew I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to see. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd heard. I tried to focus on my commissioned work, took more landscape shots, adjusted my equipment, checked my film stock. But my mind kept returning to the sound. To the disturbance in the water. That evening, I made a decision. I would set up to film overnight. Use my video camera instead of the still camera. Set it on a tripod pointed at the water, let it run for hours if necessary. If something happened again, I'd capture it on film. I need to explain something about the equipment I was using. This was 1986. No digital cameras, no smartphones, no easy way to record and share footage. I had a VHS camcorder, a bulky thing that recorded onto full-size VHS tapes. Each tape could record for 3 hours. The camera had a decent zoom lens, good low-light capability for the time, and a built-in microphone that picked up ambient sound. I'd used it before for documenting animal behavior. Had footage of deer at dawn, eagles hunting, seals on the coast. It was a tool, nothing more. A way to capture movement and behavior that still photographs couldn't show. I set up the camera that evening around 9 o'clock. Positioned it on the tripod at the water's edge, pointed it toward the area where I'd seen the disturbance the night before. Set it to record. Then I sat nearby, waiting. The first hour was uneventful. Just the water, the fading light, the occasional bird call. I made notes in my field journal, trying to stay focused, trying not to let my mind wander. The second hour was the same. I started to think I was wasting my time. That whatever I'd heard the night before was a one-time occurrence. A fluke. But I kept the camera running. Around 11:30, the wind picked up. Clouds moved in, covering what little light remained from the sky. The water turned black, almost invisible in the darkness. I could barely see the surface. And then I heard it again. That sound. Low. Resonant. Unmistakable. I moved to the camera, checked the viewfinder. The image was dark, grainy, hard to make out details. But the microphone was picking up the sound clearly. I could hear it on the camera's small speaker, reverberating across the water. I adjusted the focus, tried to see if there was any movement. And then, in the viewfinder, I saw it. A shape. Dark against the dark water. Rising. My hand started shaking. I gripped the tripod to steady myself. Kept my eye pressed to the viewfinder. The shape continued to rise. Slowly. Deliberately. And I kept filming. Before I continue, I need you to understand something. What I filmed that night changed my life. Destroyed it in many ways. I've been ridiculed, investigated, accused of fraud. I've lost work, lost friends, lost any sense of normalcy. And all because I did what any photographer would do. I documented what I saw. If you're still watching, if you've made it this far, then subscribe to this channel. Share this video. Comment below. Because I need people to hear this. I need people to understand that what I filmed was real. That I'm not a liar or a con artist. That I simply pointed a camera at the water and captured something that science says shouldn't exist. And that something has haunted me every day since. The footage runs for 8 minutes and 43 seconds. That's how long the creature stayed on the surface. 8 minutes and 43 seconds of the clearest documentation of the Loch Ness phenomenon ever captured. I've watched it thousands of times. I can describe every second from memory. The first 30 seconds show the dark water, the sound growing louder. Then the shape begins to emerge. It's difficult to see at first because of the low light conditions, but as it rises higher, it becomes more distinct. A neck. Long, thick, muscular. Rising from the water at an angle, dripping, catching what little ambient light there is. At the 45-second mark, the neck is fully extended. I estimate it at about 12 feet above the waterline. The camera's zoom wasn't sufficient to capture fine details, but you can see the general shape. The texture of the skin. The way it moves, slowly scanning the shoreline. For the next 3 minutes, the creature holds that position. The neck sways slightly, like a snake's head swaying before it strikes. But there's no aggression in the movement. It seems calm, alert, aware. At 3 minutes and 20 seconds, something changes. The creature's head, which had been pointed away from me, turns. Slowly, deliberately, until it's facing directly toward the camera. Toward me. That's when I felt it. The same feeling I'd had 6 nights before. That I was seeing something I shouldn't be seeing. That I'd crossed some invisible boundary. The creature stayed focused on the camera for another minute. And then, at 4 minutes and 30 seconds, it began to move. The neck lowered slightly, and I could see more of the body. A massive, dark mass just beneath the surface. Longer than I could comprehend. The water displaced around it as it shifted position. At 5 minutes, the creature raised higher. The neck extended further, and for the first time, I could see what might have been flippers or appendages beneath the surface. Large, paddle-like shapes moving through the water. The sound changed at this point. Became deeper, more resonant. Almost felt rather than heard. The camera's microphone picked it up clearly. A low-frequency rumble that vibrated through the air. At 6 minutes and 10 seconds, the creature began to dive. Not suddenly. Not violently. Just a slow, controlled descent back into the water. The neck lowered, the body submerged, and the surface gradually settled. By 7 minutes, only ripples remained. The water was returning to calm. The sound was fading. At 8 minutes and 43 seconds, the footage shows nothing but still, dark water. The creature was gone. I kept the camera running for another hour. Nothing else happened. The water remained calm. The sound didn't return. Eventually, I turned off the camera. Ejected the tape. Held it in my hands, staring at it in the darkness, knowing that what I'd just captured would change everything. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the water until dawn, replaying the footage in my mind, trying to process what I'd seen. Trying to decide what to do with it. By morning, I'd made my decision. I would finish my commission. Complete the landscape photography I'd been hired to do. And then I would take the tape to someone who could verify it. A scientist, maybe, or a documentary filmmaker. Someone who could analyze it properly, confirm that it was genuine, and help me release it to the world in a way that would be taken seriously. I thought I was being smart. Careful. I thought that by following the proper channels, by approaching this professionally, I could avoid the fate of so many others who'd claimed to have evidence of the creature. I thought I could maintain my credibility. I was wrong about all of it. I left Loch Ness 2 days after filming the creature. Packed up my camp, loaded my equipment into my van, and drove back to my cottage near Fort William. I'd completed the landscape photography work. Had rolls of film to develop and hundreds of acceptable images. The commission was fulfilled. But the VHS tape sat in my camera bag like a lead weight. I couldn't stop thinking about it. Couldn't stop replaying the footage in my mind. At night, I'd lie awake, seeing that dark shape rising from the water, hearing that low, resonant sound. I spent 3 days developing the landscape photographs. Printed contact sheets. Selected the best images. Sent them to the magazine along with my invoice. Professional. Routine. As if nothing unusual had happened. And then I turned my attention to the tape. I made 3 copies. Kept the original locked in a fireproof safe. Put 1 copy in a safety deposit box at my bank. Kept the 3rd copy at home for viewing and potential analysis. Then I started making calls. I contacted the marine biology department at the University of Edinburgh. Spoke to a professor who specialized in aquatic animals. Explained that I had footage from Loch Ness that I wanted analyzed. Asked if he'd be willing to view it, verify its authenticity, perhaps help me determine what species I'd filmed. He was skeptical. Asked if I was serious. When I insisted I was, he agreed to meet with me. We arranged a time the following week. I'd drive to Edinburgh, show him the footage, get his professional opinion. I also contacted a documentary filmmaker I'd worked with years before. A man named Peter Morrison who'd produced several natural history programs for the BBC. I explained the situation. He was more interested than the professor had been. Said he'd like to see the footage as well. Maybe there was a program in it. I felt optimistic. Nervous, but optimistic. I had clear documentation of something extraordinary. I'd followed proper procedures, approached credible people, done everything right. Within a few weeks, the footage would be verified, released, and I'd be recognized for capturing one of the most significant zoological discoveries of the century. That's what I believed would happen. The reality was very different. I met with the professor first. Drove to Edinburgh on a Tuesday morning, brought the tape, sat in his office while he watched it on a television set. He was silent throughout the viewing. When it finished, he rewound it and watched it again. Then he turned to me. "The footage is interesting," he said. "But I can't verify what it shows. The image quality is too poor. The lighting conditions are inadequate. And without additional data, without samples or measurements or corroborating evidence, I can't make any scientific claims about what you filmed." "But you can see it," I said. "You can see the shape, the movement." He nodded. "I can see something. But I can't tell you what it is. It could be a log. Could be a boat. Could be an optical illusion caused by waves and shadows. Or yes, it could be a large aquatic animal. But based on this footage alone, I can't make a determination." I was stunned. I'd shown him 8 minutes and 43 seconds of clear footage showing a creature rising from the water, moving, vocalizing. And his response was that he couldn't determine what it was. I met with Peter Morrison 2 days later. He watched the footage with more enthusiasm. Called it remarkable, fascinating, potentially explosive. But then he explained the problem. "No one will believe it's real," he said. "Not without additional verification. There have been too many hoaxes, too many faked photographs and videos. Unless you can prove this wasn't staged, unless you can provide evidence that what we're seeing is genuine, no broadcaster will touch it. They'll assume it's a fraud. And releasing it would damage both your reputation and theirs." I tried to argue. Pointed out the consistency of the footage, the behavior of the creature, the sound recording. But Peter just shook his head. "I believe you," he said. "I think you filmed something real. But belief isn't enough. The public won't accept it. The scientific community won't accept it. And without their acceptance, this footage is worthless." He was right. But I didn't want to accept it. Over the following weeks, I contacted other scientists, other filmmakers, other journalists. showed the footage to anyone who would watch. The responses were always the same. Interesting, but not verifiable. Remarkable, but not conclusive. Extraordinary, but not credible. And then the rumors started. Word got out that I had Loch Ness footage. That I was shopping it around, trying to sell it, trying to make money off another monster hoax. My name started appearing in newspapers, not as a respected wildlife photographer, but as the latest in a long line of Nessie charlatans. I received phone calls. Some from people offering to buy the footage. Others from people calling me a liar. I received letters, both supportive and hostile. My mailbox filled with conspiracy theories, accusations, and occasionally, threats. My commissioned work dried up. Magazines that had hired me for years stopped returning my calls. Publishers who'd bought my images before suddenly weren't interested. My reputation, built over 20 years of professional work, collapsed in a matter of weeks. And through it all, I kept watching the footage. Kept trying to understand what had happened. Kept asking myself if I should have just deleted the tape, pretended I'd never filmed anything, gone on with my quiet life. But I couldn't. Because what I'd captured was real. And real things deserve to be acknowledged, even when no one wants to believe them. By the end of 1986, I'd lost almost everything. My income had dropped to nearly nothing. The few clients who still contacted me made it clear they were doing me a favor. One magazine editor I'd worked with for 8 years told me flat out that associating with me was bad for business. "People think you're a fraud, James," he said. "And we can't be connected to that." I tried to move on. Tried to put the footage aside and return to my regular work. Spent weeks in the highlands photographing wildlife, building up a new portfolio, attempting to rebuild my reputation. But everywhere I went, people knew. The other photographers I'd worked alongside for years avoided me. The locals who'd helped me find locations and provided tips suddenly had nothing to say. I'd become contaminated by association with the Loch Ness legend. The worst part wasn't the professional damage. It was the psychological toll. I kept watching the footage. Every night, I'd sit in my cottage with the tape playing on my television, studying every frame, trying to understand what I'd witnessed. The shape rising from the water. The way it moved. The sound it made. All of it was real. All of it had happened. But no one believed me. I started having nightmares. Not about the creature itself, but about the moment I'd filmed it. In the dreams, I'd be standing at the water's edge with the camera, and the creature would surface exactly as it had that night. But instead of diving back down after 8 minutes and 43 seconds, it would stay there. Watching me. Waiting. And I'd realized that filming it had been a mistake. That I'd violated some unspoken rule. That there would be consequences. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, unable to shake the feeling that something terrible was coming. My ex-wife called me in December. We hadn't spoken since the divorce was finalized in early 1985. She'd heard about the footage, about the rumors, about my collapsing career. "Are you all right?" she asked. I told her I was fine. She didn't believe me. "You need to let this go, James," she said. "Whatever you think you filmed, it's destroying you. Just let it go." But I couldn't let it go. Because letting it go meant accepting that what I'd experienced wasn't real. That I'd somehow fabricated or misinterpreted what I'd seen. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that wasn't true. In early 1987, I made another attempt to get the footage verified. This time I contacted American researchers. There was more interest in cryptozoology in the United States, more people willing to consider unconventional evidence. I sent VHS copies to 3 different research organizations, along with detailed descriptions of how and when the footage was captured. 2 of them never responded. The third sent back a letter explaining that while they found the footage intriguing, they couldn't authenticate it without access to the original tape and the camera I'd used. They invited me to bring both to their facility in California for analysis. I couldn't afford the trip. My savings were nearly depleted. I was behind on my mortgage payments. The idea of flying to America with expensive equipment I couldn't replace if something went wrong was impossible. I wrote back explaining the situation. Never heard from them again. By summer of 1987, I'd stopped trying to get the footage verified. I locked the original tape in the safe, put the copies in storage, and tried to pretend the whole thing had never happened. I took whatever photography work I could find, mostly weddings and local events. Work that was beneath my skill level but paid the bills. Work that didn't require the kind of reputation I'd once had. I stopped going to Loch Ness. Couldn't bear to see the water, to remember that night. Drove out of my way to avoid it when traveling. The place that had once been just another beautiful Scottish landscape had become something else. A source of trauma. A reminder of everything I'd lost. But the dreams continued. Every few nights, I'd be back at the water's edge with the camera. And the creature would surface. And I'd film it again, knowing even as I did that it would ruin me. In 1989, 3 years after filming the creature, I received an unexpected phone call. A journalist from a Scottish newspaper wanted to interview me about the footage. He'd heard the stories, seen references to it in various articles about Loch Ness, and wanted to do a proper feature. Not a hit piece, he said. Not another article calling you a fraud. I want to tell your side of the story. His name was Robert McIntyre. He worked for a respected Edinburgh paper. I was skeptical, but I agreed to meet with him. By this point, I had nothing left to lose. My career was gone. My reputation was destroyed. Maybe, I thought, a sympathetic article would at least set the record straight about what had happened. Robert came to my cottage on a cold afternoon in March. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 30, with the earnest manner of someone who still believed journalism could uncover truth. We sat in my small living room, and I told him everything. About the commission that brought me to Loch Ness. About the sounds I'd heard. About setting up the camera and capturing 8 minutes and 43 seconds of footage that no one would believe. "Can I see it?" he asked. I hesitated. But then I retrieved one of the copies from storage and played it for him on my television. He watched in silence, leaning forward, eyes fixed on the screen. When it finished, he sat back and looked at me. "That's incredible," he said. "I mean, assuming it's real." "It is real," I told him. "I believe you," he said. "But you understand the problem. Without verification, without corroboration, without some way to prove this wasn't staged or manipulated, most people won't accept it." "I know," I said. "Have you considered releasing it publicly?" he asked. "Not trying to sell it or get it authenticated first. Just putting it out there and letting people decide for themselves." I'd considered it. Many times. But releasing it without context, without any scientific backing, would make things worse. I'd be labeled not just a fraud, but a publicity-seeking fraud. And the footage itself would be dismissed as just another in the long line of Nessie hoaxes. Robert wrote his article. It was published 2 weeks later. To his credit, it was fair. He presented my account accurately, described the footage objectively, and included quotes from scientists explaining why they couldn't verify it. He didn't call me a liar. He didn't accuse me of fabrication. But the article changed nothing. If anything, it made things worse. It brought renewed attention to the footage, which brought renewed criticism. I received more letters, more phone calls, more accusations. The small amount of work I'd managed to secure dried up again. One letter in particular haunted me. It was from another wildlife photographer, someone I'd known professionally for years. He wrote that he was disappointed in me. That by associating myself with the Loch Ness circus, I'd damaged the credibility of all serious nature photographers. That I should have known better than to chase fame at the expense of my profession. I wrote back explaining that I hadn't chased anything. That I'd simply documented what I'd seen. That I never wanted any of this attention. I never sent the letter. You need to understand something. If you're still watching this, if you've made it this far, you need to understand what it's like to have the truth and be unable to make anyone believe it. To have evidence that should change everything but changes nothing. To watch your life fall apart because you documented something real that everyone assumes is fake. Subscribe to this channel. Share this video. Leave a comment. Not for me, but for anyone else who's experienced something they can't explain and been punished for talking about it. Because this isn't just about a monster in a Scottish loch. It's about what happens when reality doesn't match what people are willing to accept. The footage is real. What I'm telling you is true. And I've spent 34 years paying the price for it. By 1990, I'd made peace with the fact that the footage would never be accepted. I'd tried every avenue I could think of. Contacted scientists, filmmakers, researchers, journalists. Sent copies to organizations around the world. Offered to let people examine the original tape and camera. Nothing worked. No one would validate it. No one would take it seriously. So I made a decision. I would keep the footage private. Lock it away. Stop trying to convince people of what I'd filmed. Move forward with whatever remained of my life and career. I went back to basics. Started rebuilding my portfolio with conventional wildlife photography. Deer in the highlands. Seabirds on the coast. Landscapes and close-ups of flora. The kind of work I'd done before July 1986. The kind of work that didn't require anyone to believe anything extraordinary. It was slow progress. I was 54 years old, trying to rebuild a reputation that had been destroyed. But gradually, some of my old clients started working with me again. A few magazines accepted my submissions. I wasn't making the income I'd once made, but I was surviving. I forced myself to stop thinking about Loch Ness. Stopped watching the footage. Stopped having conversations about what I'd filmed. When people asked, I'd say it was all behind me now. That I'd moved on. But moving on isn't the same as forgetting. The footage was still in my safe. The memories were still in my mind. And the knowledge that I'd captured something extraordinary, something that could have advanced human understanding of the natural world, and been unable to share it, that knowledge never left me. The nightmares became less frequent but never stopped entirely. Once or twice a month, I'd dream about that night. About the creature surfacing. about filming it, about the feeling that I'd crossed some boundary I wasn't meant to cross. In 1995, I did something I'd been avoiding for 9 years. I drove back to Loch Ness. Not to film. Not to look for the creature. Just to see the place again. To confront whatever it was about that location that had such power over my life. I parked near Invermariston, walked down to the clearing where I'd camped in July 1986. The trees were larger. The shoreline had changed slightly. But the view was the same. The dark water stretching away toward the far shore. The hills rising beyond. The oppressive quiet that settles over the loch in the evening. I stood there for an hour, watching the water, remembering. And I realized something. The creature hadn't ruined my life. Filming it hadn't destroyed my career or my reputation. What had ruined everything was my inability to accept that some things can't be proven. That some experiences exist beyond the realm of verification and documentation. That truth and proof are not the same thing. I'd spent 9 years trying to prove what I'd experienced. Trying to make other people see what I'd seen. And in doing so, I'd lost everything that mattered. My work. My peace. My sense of self. Standing there at the water's edge, I made another decision. I would stop trying to prove anything. I would accept that the footage would remain private. That what I'd witnessed would remain my experience alone. And that would have to be enough. It wasn't enough. But it was all I had. Between 1995 and 2020, I didn't speak about the footage to anyone. I continued my photography work, slowly rebuilding what I could of my career. I never achieved the success I'd had before 1986, but I made a living. Published some images. Did some teaching workshops for amateur photographers. Built a quiet, modest life. The footage stayed locked in my safe. I didn't watch it. Didn't think about it. At least not consciously. But it was always there. A presence in my life. A weight I carried. In 2003, there was renewed media interest in Loch Ness. A BBC documentary about the history of monster sightings. They interviewed locals, showed archival footage, discussed the various photographs and films that had been presented as evidence over the decades. My footage was mentioned briefly. A rumor of a video from 1986 that had never been released. The documentary speculated about why. Probably a hoax, one scientist suggested. Or the footage wasn't clear enough to be useful. I watched the documentary alone in my cottage. Felt nothing. Or told myself I felt nothing. In 2010, I had a health scare. A minor heart attack. Spent a week in hospital. The doctors told me I needed to reduce stress, take better care of myself. I was 74 years old. The kind of age where you start thinking about mortality. About what you'll leave behind. About what matters. I thought about the footage. About whether I should leave instructions for what to do with it after I died. Who should get it? Whether it should be released or destroyed. I decided to wait. To leave that decision for later. For a time when I knew what the right answer was. In 2015, my ex-wife died. Cancer. We hadn't spoken in years, but her daughter, my former stepdaughter, called to tell me. The funeral was in Glasgow. I didn't attend. Sent flowers instead. Her death affected me more than I'd expected. She'd been part of my life during good years. Years before Loch Ness. before everything fell apart. And now she was gone, and with her went one more connection to the person I'd been before that night in July 1986. I started watching the footage again. Not obsessively. Just occasionally. Late at night, when I couldn't sleep. I'd play the tape, watch the creature surface, listen to the sound it made. And I'd remember what it felt like to witness something impossible. To see with my own eyes something that shouldn't exist but did. The dreams came back. Same as before. Standing at the water's edge. Filming the creature. Knowing it was a mistake. But now, in the dreams, I understood something I hadn't understood before. The mistake wasn't filming it. The mistake was believing that filming it would matter. That documentation would lead to acceptance. That proof would change minds. The creature didn't care whether I believed in it. It existed regardless. And my belief, or anyone else's, was irrelevant to that existence. I wish I'd understood that in 1986. I wish I'd watched the footage once, marveled at what I'd captured, and then put it away forever. Never shown it to anyone. Never tried to prove anything. I might have kept my peace. Kept my life. Kept my sense of who I was. But I didn't. And now, at 78 years old, I'm making one final decision about the footage. One last attempt to do something with it. Not because I think it will change anything. Not because I expect people to believe me now when they didn't believe me before. But because I'm dying. The doctors give me 6 months. Maybe less. And I'd rather die having shared the truth than having kept it hidden. You're still here. Still watching. That means something. It means you're willing to hear the whole story. Willing to consider that maybe, just maybe, what I'm telling you is real. So subscribe to this channel. Share this video. Leave a comment telling me what you think. And then watch the footage. Really watch it. Look at the shape rising from the water. Listen to the sound. And decide for yourself whether what you're seeing is real or fake. I can't make you believe me. But I can show you what I filmed. And that will have to be enough. I'm releasing the footage with this video. The full 8 minutes and 43 seconds. Digitally restored from the original VHS tape. Enhanced to improve the image quality as much as modern technology allows. You'll be able to see everything I saw that night in July 1986. The shape rising from the water. The neck extending. The body beneath the surface. The moment it turned toward the camera. The dive back into the darkness. And you'll be able to hear the sound. That low, resonant vocalization that vibrated through the air and through my bones. I know what the skeptics will say. They'll claim it's a fake. That I staged it somehow. That the shape is a prop or a model or an optical illusion. They'll demand evidence I can't provide. Context I don't have. Verification that's impossible 38 years after the fact. And they'll be right to be skeptical. I understand that. I've spent nearly 4 decades being skeptical myself. Questioning what I saw. Wondering if there was some other explanation. Some way to interpret the footage that didn't require accepting the existence of a large unknown creature in Loch Ness. But I've watched this footage thousands of times. I've analyzed every frame. I've considered every alternative explanation. And the conclusion I come to, every time, is the same. What I filmed that night was real. It was a living creature. Something unknown to science. Something that exists in the deep water of Loch Ness despite all logic and probability suggesting it shouldn't. I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm asking you to watch the footage and decide for yourself. Look at the way the creature moves, the way the water displaces around its body, the consistency of the image across 8 minutes and 43 seconds. And ask yourself whether what you're seeing could have been faked using 1986 technology by a wildlife photographer working alone with a VHS camcorder. I'll tell you something else. Something I've never told anyone before. When I was standing at the water's edge that night, filming the creature, I felt something. Not fear, exactly. Not awe, though there was some of that. What I felt was recognition. A sense that the creature was aware of me. That it knew I was there with my camera. That it was allowing itself to be filmed. I don't know why it did that. I don't know if it understood what a camera was or what filming meant. But I had the distinct impression that the creature made a choice that night. To surface. To stay on the surface for nearly 9 minutes. To present itself to be documented. And then, when it had allowed enough time, enough documentation, it dove. Returned to the depths. And I never saw it again. I've thought about that moment countless times. Wondered what it meant. Wondered if the creature had been trying to communicate something. Or if it was simply curious. Or if I'm reading intention into behavior that was purely instinctive. I'll never know. But the impression remains. That I was part of something that night. Some exchange or interaction that I didn't fully understand. That I was granted a glimpse of something that usually remains hidden. And that filming it, documenting it, was somehow permitted. That might sound mystical or irrational. It probably is. But it's what I felt. And it stayed with me for 38 years. I'm releasing this footage not because I think it will prove anything. Proof requires more than video evidence. It requires corroboration, scientific analysis, peer review. Things I can't provide. Things that are impossible now. I'm releasing it because it's the truth. Because what I filmed actually happened. And because truth has value even when it can't be proven. Even when no one believes it. I spent most of my life being punished for capturing this footage. Lost my career. Lost my reputation. Lost my peace of mind. And I'd be lying if I said I don't regret it. If I could go back to July 1986 and choose not to set up the camera that night, I probably would. My life would have been easier. Happier. Less complicated. But I can't go back. And the footage exists. And now, at the end of my life, I'm choosing to share it. Let the world see what I saw. Let people draw their own conclusions. And let history judge whether what I captured was real or fake. I know what I believe. I know what I witnessed. And that knowledge is enough for me. To anyone watching this who's experienced something similar, who's seen something they can't explain and been afraid to talk about it, I want to say this. Your experience is valid. Whether or not anyone believes you. Whether or not you have proof. Whether or not it makes sense. What you witnessed was real to you. And that reality doesn't require external validation. I wish I'd understood that earlier. I wish I hadn't spent so many years trying to make others believe. Trying to prove something that couldn't be proven. If I'd simply accepted my experience, kept it private, and moved on, I might have saved myself decades of suffering. But maybe sharing it now, at the end, will help someone else. Someone who's struggling with an experience they can't explain. Someone who's being called a liar or a fraud. Someone who needs to know they're not alone. So this is my final testimony. My last statement on what happened that night in July 1986 at Loch Ness. I filmed a creature. It was real. The footage is real. And whether or not anyone believes me doesn't change that reality. Watch the footage. Judge for yourself. And remember that the world is stranger than we're usually willing to admit. That there are things in the depths, in the darkness, in the wild places, that exist beyond our understanding. And that sometimes, if we're very lucky or very unlucky, we get a glimpse of them. I got my glimpse. And I've spent 38 years trying to understand what it meant. I still don't know. But I know it changed me. And I know it was real. That's all I can say. That's all I have. The footage speaks for itself. 6 months later. This epilogue is being added by Margaret Kerr, James's niece. My uncle died on September 14th. 2024. He passed quietly at home, as he wanted. I was with him in his final days. He talked about many things. His photography, his travels, his regrets, and he talked about the footage. He asked me to make sure this video stayed online after he died. To monitor the comments. To respond to questions if I could. He wanted to know that his testimony would persist. That the footage would remain available. That his truth would be out in the world. The video has been viewed millions of times since he released it in March. The responses have been mixed. Some people believe him. Others don't. The scientific community has largely ignored it. A few cryptozoologists have analyzed it and declared it genuine. Most mainstream researchers dismiss it as a hoax. My uncle expected that. He told me, in his final days, that he'd made peace with never being believed. That releasing the footage wasn't about changing minds. It was about honoring what he'd witnessed. About putting the truth into the world and letting it exist there, regardless of whether anyone accepted it. I watched the footage many times after he died. Studied it. Tried to see what he'd seen. And honestly, I don't know what to make of it. It looks real. The creature, if that's what it is, moves in ways that seem organic, alive. The footage doesn't appear manipulated. At least not to my untrained eye. But I also understand why people are skeptical. It's easier to dismiss something as fake than to accept that something impossible might be real. My uncle lived a difficult life after July 1986. He lost almost everything. But in the end, I think he found some peace. Not because people believed him, but because he told his truth. And that truth would outlive him. The footage is still here. You can watch it. You can decide what you believe. And you can remember my uncle, James Kerr, as a man who documented something extraordinary and paid a heavy price for it. Whether or not you believe what he filmed, I hope you'll remember his story. Remember that truth doesn't always lead to acceptance. That proof doesn't always lead to belief. And that sometimes, the cost of seeing something impossible is higher than anyone should have to pay. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And thank you for keeping my uncle's testimony alive. The creature in Loch Ness, whatever it is still out there. Still in the deep water. Still hidden from the world. And my uncle's footage remains the clearest documentation of it ever captured. Make of that what you will.